Black pilot told to wait outside. Minutes later, she shuts the entire company down. Ava Mitchell had always been told she flew like she was born with wings. But on a cold December morning at Aero Vista Airlines headquarters, those wings were clipped by 7 words that would change everything. Captain Mitchell, we need you to wait outside. She never imagined that simple directive would ignite a chain of events that would bring down one of America's oldest airlines, not from the sky, but from the weight of its own corruption. The early morning fog clung to the tarmac at Newark Liberty International Airport as Ava made her way through the sprawling terminal. At 37 years old, she carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from logging over 15,000 flight hours across nearly every continent. Her uniform was impeccable. 4 gold stripes on each sleeve caught the fluorescent lights as she pulled her pilot's case behind her. A quick glance at her watch, 5:17 a.m. The briefing for flight AV-102 to Los Angeles was scheduled for 5:30. Just enough time to grab a coffee from the crew lounge before meeting her co-pilot. The familiar ritual usually steadied her nerves, but today something felt different. After months of applications, interviews, and rigorous testing, this was Ava's first day as senior captain at Aero Vista Airlines, one of the country's most prestigious carriers. She had worked relentlessly for this moment. The lounge door swung open, releasing the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the low murmur of early morning conversations. Inside, pilots and flight attendants huddled around tables, reviewing flight plans or scrolling through their phones. As Ava made her way to the coffee station, she noticed it, the subtle shift in the room. Conversation stalled. Curious glances were exchanged. She was used to it. According to industry statistics, less than 1% of commercial airline pilots were Black women. You must be Captain Mitchell, a voice said behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with a man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, and the same 4 gold stripes on his uniform. Captain Edward Collins, he introduced himself, extending a hand. Welcome to Aero Vista. Ava shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be here. Ava took a deep breath, pouring cream into her coffee. As she stirred, she caught her reflection in the metallic surface of the machine. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far. She had lived by those words, graduating at the top of her class at the Air Force Academy, serving 8 years as a military transport pilot, and completing 3 combat tours in Afghanistan before transitioning to commercial aviation. She had faced challenges before, but something about Edward Collins set off alarm bells. Ava entered the briefing room where 6 flight attendants and her co-pilot, First Officer Ryan Carter, were already seated. Ryan, a young pilot with just under 5 years of commercial experience, stood as she walked in. Captain Mitchell, he greeted with a genuine smile. I've heard great things. Looking forward to flying with you. Before Ava could respond, Executive Operations Director William Harris entered, followed closely by Edward Collins. Harris, a tall man with deep-set eyes and a permanent scowl, cleared his throat. There's been a change of plans. Ava straightened in her seat. Captain Collins will be taking command of Flight AV-102 today. Captain Mitchell, we need you to wait outside while we reassign you. A heavy silence fell over the room. Ava felt the heat rise in her neck as all eyes turned to her. May I ask why? Her voice was controlled, but inside she burned. I was scheduled for this flight weeks ago. Harris didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he glanced at Collins before answering. It's a matter of experience. Los Angeles is a complex approach, and given your unfamiliarity with our protocols. With all due respect, Ava interrupted, her tone firm, I've flown into LAX over 70 times, including in severe weather. My qualifications were thoroughly reviewed. Harris's expression hardened. Captain Mitchell, this isn't up for discussion. Please wait outside. Ava's stomach twisted, but she knew this wasn't the moment to fight. Not yet. With as much dignity as she could muster, she nodded, set her flight documents down, and walked out. The hallway felt colder than before. Leaning against the wall, her mind raced. This wasn't just discrimination. It was calculated. After 10 agonizing minutes, the door opened. It wasn't Harris or Collins. It was Ryan Carter looking uncomfortable. Sorry about that, Captain, he said in a low voice. For what it's worth, I think this is absolute nonsense. Ava exhaled slowly. What did they say after I left? Ryan hesitated. They claimed, Ryan exhaled sharply, lowering his voice. They said it's standard procedure for new captains. He trailed off, glancing down the hallway. Ava narrowed her eyes. But? Ryan hesitated. I've been here 3 years. I've seen 4 new captains start. Not one of them got pulled from their first flight. A familiar weight settled in Ava's chest. She had faced discrimination before, but this felt strategic, deliberate. Thanks for telling me, she said, keeping her voice steady. There's more, Ryan leaned in. They reassigned me as Collins's co-pilot, but they want you to shadow flight AV315 to Denver, just to, he made air quotes, acclimate you to company procedures. Ava nodded slowly. Who's captaining that flight? Ryan's face darkened. Charles Bennett. The name hit like a hammer. Captain Charles Bennett was Aerovista's most senior pilot and an outspoken critic of diversity in the industry. Ava had never met him, but his reputation preceded him. I see, she said quietly. Ryan hesitated. Ava, if you want to file a complaint, I'll back you up. Ava considered it, but on her first day, filing a complaint would brand her as difficult, a reputation she couldn't afford. Let me handle flight 315 first, she decided. But I appreciate the offer. Ryan nodded, understanding the unspoken calculation. Good luck with Bennett. He can be old-fashioned. Ava almost laughed. I've dealt with old-fashioned before. As Ryan walked away, Ava's phone vibrated. A message from her younger sister, Natalie. Knock them dead on your first day, sis. So proud of you. Ava stared at the screen, emotions warring within her. Pride in how far she'd come, anger at the situation, and determination not to let this setback define her. She typed back a quick reply. All good here. Tell you about it tonight. Flight AV315 to Denver became her personal trial. Bennett, a man in his early 60s with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl, barely acknowledged her presence. His first officer, Daniel Foster, threw her occasional apologetic glances, but said nothing. Ava sat in the jump seat, silently observing. Bennett was thorough. Whatever his personal failings, he knew how to fly. As they pushed back from the gate, he finally spoke. I don't know what kind of operation you came from, Captain Mitchell, he said, not bothering to look at her. But at Aerovista, we do things by the book. No shortcuts, no improvisations. The implication was clear. He assumed she was unprofessional. Ava kept her voice even. Standardization is the foundation of safety, Captain. Bennett grunted, almost disappointed she didn't take the bait. The 2-hour flight felt endless. Bennett narrated his actions in a condescending manner, as if Ava were a novice rather than a seasoned captain with thousands of flight hours. She swallowed her pride and absorbed the humiliation, focusing instead on learning Aerovista's procedures, because something told her she would need every bit of knowledge to fight what was coming. As Flight AV315 began its descent into Denver, Ava kept her focus on every detail. Then, it happened. Bennett entered the wrong frequency for approach control. It was a minor but noticeable error, one that could create confusion during landing. First Officer Daniel Foster either didn't notice it or was too intimidated to correct him. Ava hesitated for a second, then made a decision. Captain, she said calmly, I believe Denver approaches on 2835 today, not 124.75. The cockpit went silent. Bennett's shoulders visibly tensed. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then stiffly, he checked the approach chart. That's correct. He adjusted the radio. Thank you, Captain Mitchell. The acknowledgement cost him something, his pride, his authority. Ava had expected that would be the end of it. But as they taxied to the gate, Bennett surprised her. You have a good eye. He still wouldn't look at her. Most wouldn't have caught that. Ava nodded. Thank you, sir. Don't misunderstand, Bennett continued, his voice hardening. One good catch doesn't make you Aerovista material. This airline has standards, traditions. Not everyone fits. The message couldn't have been clearer if he had spelled it out. Ava felt a cold anger rise in her. With respect, Captain, traditions evolve. They have to. Bennett finally turned to face her, his pale blue eyes cold. Not at Aerovista, they don't. The rest of the day was a blur of passive-aggressive slights and thinly veiled hostility. When Ava returned to Newark, she was informed she'd be shadowing different captains for the rest of the week. All men, all with reputations like Bennett's. The pattern was clear. They were hazing her, hoping she'd quit. That evening, sitting in her newly rented apartment, a glass of Cabernet in hand, Ava video called her sister. They did what? Natalie's voice was sharp with outrage. That's textbook discrimination, Ava. You could sue them into oblivion. Ava sighed. And then what? Be known as the black woman who sued her way into the cockpit? I'd never have the crew's trust. Natalie scowled. So you're just going to take it? Ava's jaw tightened. I didn't say that. A hint of steel entered her voice. I said I'm not suing yet. There are other ways to fight. What's your plan? Ava took a slow sip of wine, considering. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. This feels organized, systemic. I need to know if this is just a few dinosaurs or if it goes deeper. Natalie's voice lowered. Be careful, Ava. These corporate types protect their own. I know. Ava's voice was steady. But I didn't come this far to be pushed out before I even get started. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ava opened her laptop and began digging into Aerovista Airlines. The company, founded in 1967, had grown from a regional carrier into a national powerhouse with international roots. Its safety record was solid, if unexceptional. Its leadership, overwhelmingly white, male, only 2 women on the board of directors, not a single person of color in upper management. More telling were the employee reviews. As Ava scanned through dozens of posts, a pattern emerged, glowing reviews from white male employees. But from women and minorities, a different story. Phrases like old boys club, glass ceiling, and hostile work environment kept appearing. Something was very wrong at Aerovista Airlines, and Ava Mitchell was about to expose it all. Ava scrolled through pages of employee reviews, noticing a disturbing pattern, glowing praise from white male employees, while women and minorities described an old boys network in a hostile atmosphere. Digging deeper, she searched for lawsuits or complaints. She found 3 discrimination cases against Aerovista Airlines in the past decade. All had been settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. 2 involved female flight attendants who alleged retaliation and unfair dismissals. 1 involved a Hispanic ground crew supervisor who claimed he was denied promotions despite seniority. Ava was about to close her laptop when something caught her eye. An article from 8 months ago. Aerovista Airlines faces FAA scrutiny over maintenance logs. The article was brief. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, had launched a routine review of Aerovista's maintenance procedures after discrepancies were found in their documentation. Ava bookmarked it. All airlines faced FAA audits, but something about the timing nagged at her. Aerovista had recently expanded its international routes, increasing pressure on its maintenance teams. Were corners being cut? The next morning, Ava reported for her shadowing assignment on a flight to Denver, this time under Captain Andrew Peterson. To her surprise, Peterson was cordial, if reserved. Mid-flight at cruising altitude, he glanced at her. For what it's worth, not all of us agree with how you're being treated. Ava studied him carefully. But you're not speaking up either. Peterson sighed. It's complicated. Aerovista is traditional. That word again. Look, he lowered his voice. Watch yourself around Harris and Bennett. They've been friends for 30 years. Harris protects Bennett, no matter what. Ava pressed. Even if they're putting safety at risk? Peterson's face stiffened. A flash of unease crossed his features. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Ava replied. Is there something I should know? Peterson turned away, his posture rigid. I've said too much already. Just keep your eyes open. The warning lingered in Ava's mind. During her layover, she made a point to visit the maintenance hangar under the pretense of learning Aerovista's procedures. Most of the ground crew were polite but distant, except for one technician, a middle-aged black man named Derek Lawson. You're from Detroit? He asked as he inspected an engine cowling. So am I. Ava seized the opportunity. You've been with Aerovista long? 23 years, Derek said. I've kept these birds in the air. Seen a lot of changes. Not all good. Ava leaned in. How so? Derek glanced around before answering. New management's been pushing us to speed things up. More flights, less turnaround time, some checks that used to be mandatory. He lowered his voice. Now they're at the technician's discretion. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. Is that legal? Derek gave her a knowing look. Gray area. Derek grimaced, lowering his voice. They've got fancy lawyers who know how to word things so it sounds legal. But between us, I wouldn't put my family on some of these planes. Before Ava could press further, a supervisor appeared, watching them closely. Derek quickly returned to his work, and Ava nodded in thanks before walking away, her mind racing with implications. For the next 2 weeks, Ava endured constant humiliation. She was treated like a rookie, despite her 15,000 flight hours and combat experience. They assigned her the worst flight routes, gave her minimal rest, and subjected her to excessive scrutiny. But she persisted. She began cataloging everything, every slight, every deviation from protocol, and every hint of something sinister beneath Aerovista's polished exterior. She also started forming alliances. Ryan Carter, who continued to express quiet support. Jessica Reed, a flight attendant who had faced her own battles with the company's toxic culture. Derek Lawson, who gradually shared more troubling details about maintenance shortcuts. Ava was careful. She never explicitly stated her suspicions, but she made it clear that she valued truth and safety above all else. 3 weeks into her employment, Ava was finally assigned to captain a flight. It was a red-eye from Newark to Las Vegas, a route typically unpopular due to rowdy passengers and inconvenient hours. Ryan was assigned as her first officer, which she suspected wasn't a coincidence. If Aerovista expected her to fail, they'd want a friendly witness to confirm it. Then, during the pre-flight inspection, Ava noticed something alarming. The maintenance log didn't add up. Several routine checks had inconsistent dates. When she questioned the ground crew, they assured her that everything was within parameters. Not satisfied, Ava insisted on a thorough inspection. This delayed the flight by 20 minutes, a cardinal sin in the airline industry's on-time departure culture. "Are you sure that's necessary, Captain?" Ryan asked nervously. "Dispatch is already asking about our delay." Ava didn't hesitate. Better 20 minutes late than not arriving at all. She continued her meticulous checks, determined to uncover why the records didn't match. Eventually, she cleared the aircraft for departure, but filed a detailed report documenting her concerns. The flight itself was uneventful, but upon their return to Newark, Ava was immediately summoned to William Harris's office. Harris wasted no time on pleasantries. "Captain Mitchell, I understand you delayed flight AV227 last night with an unnecessary inspection." Ava sat straight, meeting his gaze. The maintenance logs had inconsistencies that warranted further examination. Harris leaned forward. "Our ground crew cleared that aircraft." "And I overruled them," Ava countered, "because the intake valve inspection dates didn't align with service records. And FAA regulations require complete and accurate documentation before flight." Harris's expression darkened. "At Aerovista, we value efficiency alongside safety. Delays cost this company thousands of dollars." Ava's jaw tightened. She was being warned, and she knew exactly what that meant. Harris's eyes bore into Ava. "If you can't trust our established procedures, perhaps this isn't the right environment for you." The threat hung thick in the air. Ava recognized the trap: back down and ignore the safety issues, or stand her ground and risk her career. She took a slow breath. "Mr. Harris, are you suggesting that I overlooked discrepancies in maintenance logs?" His expression darkened. "I'm suggesting you trust the expertise of our maintenance teams. These are seasoned professionals with decades of experience." Ava nodded slowly. "I see. Would you mind putting that directive in writing for my records?" Harris's face flushed with anger. "That won't be necessary. Just use better judgment in the future." Ava stood. "I always do. Safety is my primary judgment call, always." She walked out, her heart pounding. She had just escalated the conflict beyond repair. Harris wouldn't forget this. Neither would his allies. She was now officially a problem. That night, Ava spread out all the notes, records, and documents she had collected. The web of inconsistencies, warning signs, and policy violations had become impossible to ignore. Aerovista wasn't just cutting corners. They were pressuring employees to ignore safety concerns and creating a culture of silence and intimidation. Ava knew what she had to do, but the consequences would be severe. The aviation industry was small. Whistleblowers rarely found welcome elsewhere. Her career, something she had built meticulously over decades, would likely never recover. She thought of her father, who had once told her, "Flying isn't just a job, it's a sacred trust. People put their lives in your hands. Ava reached for her phone and dialed a number she had saved weeks ago but hoped never to use. Her sister Natalie answered, her lawyer voice sharp. "It's me," Ava said. "I need your help, and I need you to connect me with that friend of yours at the FAA." A pause. "You're sure about this?" Ava looked at the evidence spread before her. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Natalie exhaled. "Okay, tell me everything." The next morning, Ava prepared for her scheduled flight to Boston. But something had shifted. She felt strangely calm. She and Natalie had spent hours cross-referencing regulations and organizing documentation. At 3:00 a.m., after Natalie had finally fallen asleep on Ava's couch, Ava had sat alone in the darkness, contemplating what was ahead. She wasn't just going up against Aerovista. She was challenging an entire system, one that protected power at all costs. And she was ready. Ava sat in her dimly lit apartment, the glow of her laptop screen casting long shadows across the room. The USB drive Marcus had given her was now plugged in, revealing a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Flight logs altered to mask safety violations. Maintenance reports fabricated to avoid costly repairs. Internal memos pressuring mechanics to clear unfit aircraft. This wasn't a few isolated incidents. This was a systemic cover-up, one that could lead to catastrophic failure in midair. Her hands trembled as she copied the files onto a secure cloud drive. She had spent her career trusting in the integrity of aviation, believing that safety was an absolute. But now Aerovista had turned safety into a gamble. The next morning, Ava walked into Aerovista's headquarters, her restricted ID badge clipped tightly to her uniform. Her presence sent ripples through the building, whispers in hallways, stolen glances from crew members, tense looks from executives. They knew she was a problem, and now she had proof of theirs. She stopped by the maintenance bay, where Marcus was already waiting. "It's worse than I thought," she said quietly. "We can't let this continue." Marcus nodded but looked around nervously. "They're watching everyone who talks to you. I overheard Harris on the call. She needs to be contained before she burns this place down." Ava stiffened. They weren't just retaliating. They were panicking. At 2:00 p.m., she received an unexpected email. Subject, mandatory meeting. Aerovista executive leadership. Her stomach tightened. They were about to make their move. Ava forwarded the email to Natalie with a single line. "If I don't call you in an hour, release everything." Then she straightened her uniform and headed for the executive conference room. Inside, William Harris, Charles Bennett, and 3 company lawyers were already seated. "Captain Mitchell," Harris said smoothly. "Have a seat." Ava didn't move. "If this is about Flight 227, I've already documented my findings." Harris smiled coldly. "It's about more than that. We've been reviewing your performance. Given your difficulty in adapting to our culture, we believe it's best for everyone if you resign." He slid a folder across the table. Ava sat in the dimly lit conference room, the air thick with tension. Across the table, William Harris slid a crisp document toward her, a severance package wrapped in a strict non-disclosure agreement. His voice was cool, calculated. "Sign this, and you'll leave with full benefits. Otherwise, we'll terminate you for cause, insubordination, failure to comply with procedures, creating a hostile work environment." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "No airline will touch you after that." The ultimatum, the final threat. Ava took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. Without a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out her own folder, placing it deliberately on the table. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said, her voice calm but firm. Harris frowned as he opened it, his expression shifting from irritation to something much closer to fear. The folder contained FAA regulations meticulously cross-referenced with Aerovista's falsified maintenance logs. It detailed fraud, manipulated records, and whistleblower testimonies. Harris flipped through the pages, his hands trembling slightly. Then, Ava delivered the final blow. "I sent everything to the FAA this morning," she said. "They'll be launching an immediate investigation." A cold silence filled the room. Harris's face twisted in anger, and in a fit of desperation, he slammed his fist against the table. "This is blackmail," he spat. Ava remained unfazed. She leaned in, her eyes locked on his. "No, Captain Harris," she corrected him. "This is accountability." She sat back and watched as the men in the room grappled with their new reality. They had been outmaneuvered, exposed, and completely out of options. Harris clenched his jaw, struggling for control. "We'll need time." "You have 1 hour," Ava interrupted. "After that, I make the calls." A tense silence stretched between them. Charles Bennett, pale and sweating, glanced nervously at the lawyers beside him. One of them whispered urgently in Harris's ear. Finally, after several long minutes, Harris exhaled sharply, defeat heavy in his voice. "We'll comply." Ava nodded. She had expected nothing less. They had no choice. Within 24 hours, Aerovista announced an emergency fleet-wide safety audit, grounding nearly 40% of their aircraft. Thousands of passengers were stranded as flights were canceled, and stock prices plummeted overnight. The FAA moved swiftly, launching an official investigation. Teams of inspectors flooded Aerovista's facilities, combing through maintenance records and conducting on-site safety checks. By the end of the week, the Chicago Tribune published its bombshell exposé, Aerovista's Hidden Danger, a culture of silence and corruption. The article sent shockwaves through the industry. Former employees came forward, sharing horror stories of ignored safety violations and corporate pressure to cover up issues. Industry experts publicly condemned Aerovista's reckless disregard for passenger safety. Boycotts began. Lawsuits followed. Ava watched it all unfold. She had started the storm, and now the entire company was drowning in it. 6 weeks later, she sat in a small cafe staring across the street at the Aerovista headquarters. The once proud airline had filed for bankruptcy protection, its FAA operating certificate revoked. They were finished. A crew of workers climbed ladders, peeling the company's iconic logo off the building's facade. It was over. Ava took a slow sip of her coffee, watching as Aerovista faded into history. James slid into the chair across from her, a knowing smirk on his face. "Well," he said, "you did it." Ava exhaled, feeling the weight of it all settle over her. "We did it," she corrected. James set his coffee down. Atlantic Airways just finalized their purchase of Aerovista's assets. They're offering positions to all certified staff, except, of course, the executives under investigation. Ava raised an eyebrow. "And you?" "Senior first officer," James said with a grin. "And you?" Ava shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. For the first time in years, she had options. She had received offers from 3 major airlines, been approached by aviation safety organizations, and even had a book deal on the table. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Natalie. "Turn on the news, now." Ava unlocked her phone, clicking on the breaking news notification. Justice Department announces criminal charges against Aerovista executives. Harris, Bennett, 3 others. Fraud, reckless endangerment, obstruction of justice. They were facing prison time. Ava's chest tightened as a wave of emotions flooded her. This wasn't satisfaction. This was closure. This was justice. She turned her screen toward James. He let out a low whistle. "Damn, they actually did it." Ava smiled, setting her phone down. "Yeah," she said, "they did." Maya sat across from James in the bustling cafe, the weight of the past few months finally settling over her. The exhaustion was still there, but so was something else, something steadier, stronger. James looked both tired and strangely energized, like a man who had just run a marathon but crossed the finish line victorious. "It's official," he said, setting down his coffee. "Atlantic Airways is purchasing Meridian's assets and offering positions to all certified staff. Well, except the executives under investigation, of course." Maya studied him for a moment before asking, "And you? Have they approached you yet?" James smirked. "Senior first officer track," he confirmed with a nod. "And you?" Maya took a slow sip of her coffee, considering her answer. In truth, she had options, more than she had ever imagined. 3 major airlines had reached out, eager to demonstrate their commitment to safety and diversity by hiring the whistleblower who had taken down Meridian. Aviation safety organizations had also approached her for consulting roles. There was even a book deal on the table. "Still considering," she finally said, a small smile playing at her lips. James leaned back, watching her carefully. "Whatever you decide," he said, his voice serious, "you change things. Not just at Meridian, the whole industry is on edge. They're doing internal audits now, afraid they'll be next." Maya thought about the cost of it all. The stress, the fear, the sleepless nights wondering if she was doing the right thing. She thought about Marcus, who had just been named head of maintenance quality control at Atlantic, about Lauren, who was now training to become a safety officer. And most of all, she thought about the passengers, the ones who would never know how close they had come to disaster, how their lives had been saved by people brave enough to speak up. We all change things, she corrected gently. All of us together. Just then her phone rang. It was Zoe. Have you seen the news? Her sister asked, skipping any greeting. Maya glanced at James. About the Atlantic purchase? He just told me. No, Zoe said. Barrett and the others. The Justice Department just announced criminal charges, reckless endangerment, fraud, obstruction of justice. They're facing actual prison time. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. It wasn't satisfaction, not exactly, but it was something close. A sense of justice, of completion. There's something else, Zoe continued. The FAA is creating a new aviation safety oversight committee. They want you on it. Maya turned to the window, watching as workers removed the last remnants of Meridian's name from its headquarters. The company was gone, just a ghost of letters on the building's wall. She let the moment settle before replying. Tell them I'll consider it. 3 months later, Captain Maya Daniels guided a Boeing 787 Dreamliner into the skies above Chicago. The 4 gold stripes on her sleeve gleamed in the morning sunlight as Atlantic Airways Flight 207 climbed steadily through scattered clouds. Beside her, in the first officer's seat, a young black woman named Tasha Williams monitored the instruments with focused precision. Beautiful day for flying, Maya remarked as they reached cruising altitude. Perfect, Tasha agreed. Then, after a brief hesitation, she added, Captain, I just wanted to say what you did at Meridian. It's why I kept pursuing aviation. When everyone told me to give up, I didn't. Because of you. Maya smiled, remembering her own journey. The obstacles, the battles, the victories. She looked over at Tasha and said, The sky belongs to all of us, First Officer Williams. Never forget that. As they soared through the clouds, Maya thought about the words that had set everything in motion. Captain Daniels, we need you to wait outside. That moment had changed everything. It had started a fight, one that had exposed corruption, saved lives, and transformed an industry. And as Maya looked out over the vast, endless horizon, she reflected on one truth. The sky has no doors, only new horizons waiting to be crossed. That evening, as she completed her flight log in Atlantic's Modern Operations Center, she noticed a framed quote on the wall, one that hadn't been there before. It was from her testimony before the Congressional Transportation Committee, the words she had spoken when asked why she had risked everything to expose Meridian's practices. In aviation, the truth isn't just a virtue, it's a necessity. The sky forgives many things, but it never forgives lies. She touched the frame lightly, remembering how her voice had trembled slightly when she had spoken those words. But her conviction had never wavered. That was the moment she had understood something profound. Some battles aren't just about personal fights. Some battles change everything. The aviation industry was changing. Slowly, yes, and with resistance from those clinging to outdated traditions. But it was changing nonetheless. Atlantic had implemented a blind application process for new pilots, focusing on qualifications rather than names. They had revamped their reporting systems to protect whistleblowers. They had established an independent safety council with actual authority to ground unsafe aircraft without fear of retaliation. And across the industry, other airlines were following suit. Maya's phone buzzed, a message from Zoe. Dinner tomorrow, big news to share. Maya smiled, typing back, Your place. I'll bring wine. As she gathered her things, she paused by the window, watching the ground crews prepare aircraft for the next day's flights. Technicians moved with purpose, inspecting, checking, verifying. No corners cut, no details overlooked. In the distance, a plane took off, its lights disappearing into the night sky. Maya had always loved that sight, the miracle of human ingenuity lifting thousands of pounds of metal into the air. But now it meant something more. Now every plane represented not just technological achievement, but moral victory, the triumph of integrity over expediency, of courage over complicity. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see Sarah Chen, Atlantic's chief pilot, walking toward her with a smile. I've been looking for you, Sarah said. The Academy of Aviation Safety wants you to speak at... Maya took a deep breath, feeling the crisp night air on the tarmac. She watched as a plane disappeared into the dark sky, knowing that everything had changed, not just for her, but for the entire aviation industry. The doubts, the struggles, the battles she had fought at Meridian were now behind her, but her journey was far from over. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Zoe. "Don't forget to bring that wine you love." Maya chuckled, running her finger over the screen before typing back. "Don't worry, I won't show up empty-handed." With one last glance at the horizon, she turned away from the past and walked toward the future. A future not defined by closed doors, but by endless skies waiting to be explored. Maya Daniels' story is not just a tale of personal struggle. It's a powerful lesson about integrity, courage, and the importance of standing up for what is right. In a world where silence often feels like the safer choice, Maya chose to speak the truth, a difficult but necessary decision. The first lesson from that story is the moral responsibility we all carry. In aviation, where every decision impacts hundreds of lives, safety should never be compromised. Maya understood that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing was no different from enabling it. It's only by confronting the truth that we can protect what truly matters. Second, the story highlights the power of individuals to challenge a system. Maya wasn't alone in her fight. She found allies in James, Lauren, Marcus, and others who had witnessed the same injustices. One person can spark change, but real transformation happens when many stand together. Finally, justice may take time, but it always arrives. The executives at Meridian tried to intimidate Maya, manipulate the system, and cover up their wrongdoing. But in the end, the truth prevailed. Justice didn't just come from government investigations. It came from public outrage, collective action, and the unwavering determination of those who refuse to be silent. Maya's journey is a powerful reminder that in any field, protecting the truth isn't just an option. It's a duty.